And perfect. I was just about to say, go ahead, Isabel. Uh, all right. And then without further ado, Wren, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and you can feel free to share your screen at any point when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm so excited to be with you all. I am Wren Almitra. I'm a grants consultant. I've worn a number of hats, both in the nonprofit world and consultant world. Over the past 3 years, I've been running my own business, but prior to that, I was working with the Women Food and Agriculture Network as a program and grants director, and have many years in the sustainable ag field. So I have primarily worked in the Midwest with Midwest farmers, so this is an exciting opportunity for me to connect with folks more in the eastern part of the country. What I'm going to talk about today is applicable no matter where you are and what kind of grants you're applying for, federal or private foundations, or state grants. We're really doing a broad Grants 101 overview. We'll certainly focus a little bit on federal, but we're really doing kind of a broad scope of what you need to know, as Madison said. So I think we have enough folks in the group that if you do have a question, let's put it in the chat, and then we'll definitely get to it in the Q&A at the end. I think just for getting through all the info I have, I will admit I have a lot, and I will try not to talk too fast. So we'll go through as much as we can. If we need to skip a little bit, we'll be able to review later through. I'm happy to send my slides to Madison, who I assume, Madison, you'd be able to get it to the folks that are registered. Great. Okay, awesome. All right, so I'll go ahead and share. Okay, great. So again, we're covering some Grants 101 stuff today. I know one of the biggest questions that Madison said folks have, and this is certainly not unfamiliar to me. Most questions are surrounding this first one of how do you know if you're even ready to apply for a grant? I have some different questions here for you to consider. This is certainly not a comprehensive list. There's going to be a lot of factors that go into figuring out if you are ready to apply for a grant. But some of the big ones are how long have you been in operation? And what phase are you in with your project or program idea? So are you a brand new operation or soon to be established as a farm or maybe a nonprofit doing sustainable ag work in your community? And if so, there's some other questions we'll get to in a moment. But if you're still very much in that idea phase, or even in the design or startup phase, what I'll say is there's probably going to be fewer opportunities for you. Most funders are going to want to see growth of existing programs or organizations, or even that sustaining phase where you've got yourself established and you're really ready to just like keep going or maybe add in some new components to enhance your operation. I won't say that's exclusively the case. There might be some funders out there who really are wanting to fund beginning farmer work or new nonprofit work in the field, but it might just be harder to find those types of opportunities. My last bullet point here, and then I'll get to what's in the middle, are there other types of funding that could be more appropriate for your idea or need? And so why I bring that up is because there might be loans out there that are going to be a better fit for you as a new operation or for certain expenses that may not be eligible in a grant. So now I'm going to focus on this middle section. So one of the big questions you'll need to ask yourself when you're considering applying for a grant, either a grant that you already have in mind or again, just seeking grants, is what resources are you needing to apply for a grant, do the actual project, so the thing that you're applying for to actually conduct it, and then administer it, which means doing kind of the paperwork side of it, the reporting, et cetera. So what resources do you need and which do you already have? So it's really important to do kind of an inventory list at the start. Again, what you already have versus what's needed. So you're looking at what people power do you have, what staff, partners, and supporters, what funding already exists, what funding do you need, what materials, supplies, equipment, like taking an inventory of all of that is going to be crucial. And again, this could be whole farm, your whole dream, or it could be a very specific project or program you're trying to get funding for. I think it's really important to do that. I know that Madison and CAIC offers business planning, and that would be another arena that I would consider going into if you are brand new before you start applying for grants. So these are just some of the core things that I would think about before starting. Like I said, I might be a little hesitant to recommend a grant if you're just in an idea phase. So some other things to consider. So let's say you've kind of done that process, and you're feeling pretty confident you might be ready to apply for a grant. There are some other things you want to think about. Thinking creatively and broadly about your project's needs and possible solutions. So this could mean kind of a diverse way to fund these. Maybe some of it is through loans, some of it's through grants, some of it's through partnering with other organizations. So really, again, kind of doing that inventory again. Part of why that's important is because a lot of funders want to see partnerships and really clear established networks in your community or on your farm, to make sure that you're having the biggest impact and you're getting input from constituents. The next bullet point here, identifying funding programs or opportunities whose purposes, values, and available resources align with yours. And that's the next bullet point as well. So this is really important. It's really crucial to look at a funder's priorities and make sure that what you want to do aligns with what they want to fund. So they might have a mission for like health equities, and maybe it's related to food, but perhaps you're more focused on I don't know, youth engagement or something in your farm. And so maybe the priorities don't really align. That may not be the best funder. It's kind of hard to read this image here. I apologize, but the SARE program is a really fantastic program for farms and farmer projects. And they're really great about right at the top of their website and in their guidelines explaining their mission, their vision, what they want to see funded. And so you can see pretty quickly, like, yes, we have alignment with what they want to fund. And you want to make sure they fit what you're doing. You don't want it to be a stretch either direction. And then I already mentioned this, considering if multiple types of funding could be a good fit for you and your project to get it fully funded. We'll get into this later, but and again, another reason this is important is because there are going to be a lot of costs that aren't going to be eligible for grants, such as purchasing land. Heavy machinery and equipment is typically not an eligible cost. So unfortunately, those are the things that farmers most need. And so that's why taking that inventory and then identifying other types of funding opportunities in a package with grants as a potential is important to do from the start. All right, so some other questions. Again, you're feeling pretty confident. You're starting to look at guidelines, which we'll get into in a minute, of the grant opportunities. So the first biggest one to think about is, are you even an eligible entity? So can you apply as either a farm or a nonprofit or an individual, whatever kind of hat you're wearing for your project or proposal? Are you even eligible? So I bring up this example a lot. There's a federal program called the Beginning Farmer Rancher Grant. And it sounds like, as a beginning farmer, you could apply to that grant. It's a little confusing, though, because that grant is only for nonprofits who serve beginning farmers and ranchers. So you would not be an eligible entity if you were trying to apply as an individual. There are definitely other federal grants that are for you as a farmer. Same, if you're a nonprofit, you want to make sure that nonprofits are eligible. Is the program's form of assistance appropriate to your needs? So this is kind of what I've already talked about. Are they providing grants and funding that aligns with what you need, with the type of equipment or supplies or personnel you need? So you want to make sure that that's all clear. You also want to take into account what is the average amount that they're funding. Most funders, especially federal funds, will talk about the total amount they have available across all awardees, potential awardees. That can be helpful just to give you a sense of perhaps how competitive this is going to be. But it's really helpful to know if you need, $10,000 and they're only funding 2,000, you know that, okay, we might need to figure out how to figure out where that rest of that need is coming from. That additional 8,000 could be from another grant or another source, or maybe it's not even worthwhile for you to even try for $2,000 of that project because it's going to be enough work to apply for it, and you're not getting the biggest bang for your buck. This one is not talked about enough, but it's really important, is the funding available upfront or as a reimbursement. So it's very common, especially for federal grants, to get reimbursed for your funds, which means you have to pay for whatever you're applying for upfront, submit invoices, submit reports, and then you'll get funding. Not all funders are like that, but if you're looking at state and federal, that tends to be the case. Some funders will write you a check after you've been awarded, but you just need to be aware of that. And unfortunately, that's not always very, very clearly stated in the guidelines. So you just need to dig if you can't find that. You don't want to get surprised and actually not be able to execute the project because you don't have the funds up front. And then this last bullet point, we'll talk a little bit more about later when we get into the budget section, but what match amount is required. So if you've applied for federal grants before, you would know that typically there's a match requirement. That means you as an entity have to also demonstrate that you're putting in some funds, either in kind or cash match. Sometimes that's a percentage, like 25% or 50% of what you're asking. So if you're asking for, $20,000 from the federal government, you need to show that you're putting in at least half of that if the match is 50% through cash or in kind. Match is a little confusing. We're not going to get into it a lot today because we don't have time, but that's something to keep in mind. You might have to have something that you're contributing in order to be eligible. Okay, a couple more things. Then, of course, when is the program's deadline? And that's important to think about in relation to when you need funding. Maybe you need funding in 6 months, but you're not going to hear back for 6 months, and then it's not even going to be available for another, couple of months after that, which is not atypical for federal grants, at least. Some grants have a pre-proposal process, not very many, but you just want to keep that in mind. That will extend the deadline, or extend the project start date. What's the duration of a program's grant? So is it a 1-year grant, 2-year grant, 3-year grant? Typically, federal grants are multi-year grants, but there are a lot of programs like SARE grants that are usually 1 year. Actually, no, maybe SARE are a couple. Anyway, you'll just need to look and make sure you understand how long a grant actually runs for. And then when we talk about the budget later, you'll want to create your budget for 1 year versus multiple years, depending. So again, these are all really important to think about as you're even considering applying. You might look at all these details and think we don't have the time or resources, or it's really not aligning with what we need. We need to go somewhere else for this funding. So looking at the restrictions for use of funding, I mentioned earlier, typically land, some equipment is not eligible. Sometimes personnel isn't eligible. It just really depends. And then this is an interesting point. Has someone else already done this work that you're thinking about doing? Or are you filling a niche? And why this is important is because a lot of funders do want to see something innovative. They want to see something new, or that's filling a need that it doesn't currently exist, or that no one else is filling. Okay, so those are a lot of questions to be thinking about. Hopefully you're not feeling like this, but we'll talk about ways to get some of these questions answered. So the biggest way to figure out a lot of those questions that I just posed are looking at the guidelines. So guidelines will have a lot of different names. I generically call them guidelines, but they might be requests for proposals, or RFPs, or RFAs, or NOFOs. So just get familiar with those different languages, because sometimes if you're sitting in a webinar, for example, they'll reference the NOFO or the RFP, and if you're not sure what that is, they're referring to the guidelines. This is sort of the Bible, if you will, of the grant program that you're going to be applying to. So you'll want to really, what I recommend is printing out, highlighting, taking notes. This is going to tell you everything you need to know about applying for a grant application, or putting in a proposal for a grant. I think all federal programs actually are required to have a webinar. So there should be webinars. Some programs are doing Q&A sessions. I just sat in on one today for a federal program. So sit in on those. Actually, I find those sometimes more useful than the reading the guidelines sometimes, because, well, not more useful, but very good to do together, because the Q&A portions of those webinars are where you get a lot of questions answered that sometimes just aren't as clear, unfortunately, in some of the other printed documents. This image is not helpful at all. I need to find a new one, but what this is a list of previous SARE recipients from a couple years ago. I find it very helpful to look at past grantees, what projects were awarded, where they were. Again, this helps you understand what that funder is interested in funding, and it helps you understand what's already been done. If you're allowed to, contact funder staff. Some funders say don't reach out to us at all. We don't have capacity to answer individual questions. Federal, I believe they cannot restrict that. However, it can take a little bit longer sometimes to get responses from federal staff. So if you have burning questions that are time dependent, make sure you get those in as soon as possible by email or calling them. And it's not a problem to ask other grant recipients if you know them. I know somebody who asked a grant recipient, they did not know at all, but they asked if they could look at their application because they were applying to that same program, and that other group was like, sure, you can look at our application. So if it feels appropriate, you can certainly talk to other grant recipients about their experience applying for this grant, what it was like, was it worth it, etc. So again, guidelines, print them out, highlight them. Those are your references. And if you ask funders questions, it was kind of funny on the webinar I was on today. There were a lot of questions that the staff said, go back to the guidelines, go back to the guidelines. We don't have time for that in this call, go back to the guidelines. So that's where, in theory, it should all be. Sometimes there's some information that doesn't feel as clear as it ought to be. So, okay, so we're kind of digging into Grant 101 now. Again, those are questions you should think about getting ready for a grant, where to find some of the answers about, does it meet your needs? Do you fit those grant requirements, etc. When we're starting to talk about grant writing and actually like getting organized and managing the whole process, there's several things to keep in mind. So starting early, starting from day one, as soon as you decide, hear about the grant opening and deciding to apply, start getting organized. And I use this word management in here because it really is a project management process to put a whole application together, especially if you're doing a federal grant that has so many moving parts, sometimes 20 pages and multiple players that you need to make sure are involved, and you're getting everything you need from them. So it's really important that you view it as a management project. I talk about making a crop plan where you think about when the deadline is and you go backwards from there. So when I was farming, we did crop plans when you need to harvest the thing, and then you determine when you need to seed it to make sure you're harvesting on time. So do the same for your grant writing process. So create that timeline, start getting your team together. We'll talk about that in a second. The second bullet point is huge. So register right away, day one, for any accounts that you need, especially for federal grants, because if you don't already have it, you would need a SAM registration from sam.gov and a grants.gov account. And that SAM process can take a while. Some people have it in a really short amount of time. Other people, it can take weeks. So if you already know that you're thinking about applying for some programs coming up and you haven't done this yet, I would go ahead and get that SAMs registered. It is free. It just takes a little bit of time, and you do need to renew it every year. So you'll need to keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't expire. But highly recommend that for either federal or any grant you're applying to. Most grants you're going to apply through a portal, and you want to make sure you're registered and can get in right away. Okay, so some more tips on getting organized. Most federal grants and many other funders will have a checklist already for you, but if not, I highly recommend making a checklist with all the documents needed and whatever else you want to include there to make sure that you feel best organized. There's a good chance if you're working on a federal grant, it's going to involve multiple people helping put that together. So I would recommend a spreadsheet or another document that is actually assigning roles and tasks. You can have deadlines in there, names, etc., that everybody can use. So maybe a Google Doc or something to make sure everybody's on the same page. Highly recommend one person being the primary project coordinator for that, and maybe not having too many cooks in the kitchen because that can get a little complicated, but make it really clear from the beginning who you need information from, documents from, and find a way to keep that organized. Related to creating the checklist and assigning those roles, collecting any documents and attachments you need as soon as possible as well. So for example, you are going to need for federal grants and really all grants, you're going to need some financial documents. And so you may not be the person that has those. Perhaps if you're a nonprofit, it's your executive director does if you aren't the ED, or if you are a farm and maybe you have like a business manager, maybe they have some of the documents. If you're needing letters of support, you're going to want to get those ready and sent out as soon as possible. And we can talk about those more in a moment. But the reason is because it can take especially if you're relying on other people, it really can take a while to get those pulled together, make sure that they look right, that they're organized correctly, etc. So again, starting all these kind of big pieces at the start, and then once you've kind of delegated some of those tasks and those pieces, you can start working on the actual writing of your application while all those pieces are kind of coming in. The last thing I'll say is using an outline to keep your narrative logical and to share with other coordinators and reviewers. So we'll talk about the different parts of an application, including the narrative, in a moment. But what I would suggest is taking any questions that are a part of an application. So if it's an online portal that has the applications, online, and you can fill out the answers in the portal online, I would not recommend that. I would copy and paste the questions into either a Google Doc or a Word document and draft your whole application outside of a portal, because it's way too easy to update part of it and then not another part, or something doesn't get saved and then you're submitting something that's actually not fully what you wanted to submit. This also makes it easier to work with other people. So those are some tips that I have found and other grant writers have found to be really helpful basic tools that honestly, as somebody who, like, I wouldn't have said in the past was the most super organized person, has really been critical for me and has helped me put in really successful applications. So if it's not in your comfort zone, I totally get it. But this is one way to really get there. All right, so I know there's a lot of words on here, I apologize, but one of the biggest reasons grants don't get awarded is because they aren't clear enough, they aren't concise enough. So it's really important to be clear, using pretty simple language, readable to all or most audiences. So I say don't assume reviewers know you, your work, or your acronyms. You can assume that if you're submitting a USDA grant, that there's going to be people in the ag field reviewing your application. They may not be vegetable farmers, but or fishermen, but like they know, you don't need to explain what a vegetable is or what organic ag is. Like, so you can have this balance of not having to be so like elementary with your language. But don't assume they know you or your farm, or even like necessarily the town you're from if you have to explain kind of where your region is that you're serving. We kind of referenced this earlier, explaining how your proposal advances the funder's goals. So we talked about making sure you align with their priorities. You want to make sure in your narrative that you're touching on that. You don't always have to be explicit, like this is how we are meeting your priorities, but you want to make sure that you're talking to those priorities in your proposal. So being precise and accurate, you don't need to exaggerate information. What can be a little nuanced here, depending on the funder, is some funders want more kind of storytelling in your application. They want really to know more about the problem and the community you're serving and why this is important. And some funding programs are really going to want kind of more nitty-gritty data, statistics. They might even have a template ready for you where you just plug in stuff. So you'll just want to kind of pay attention to those guidelines and, again, the questions they're asking, and make sure you're writing to exactly what they're asking you to write. Don't add in a lot of extra stuff. Don't add in extra stuff at all that they aren't asking for, especially in a federal program. It's going to be so easy for an application to get booted if you are going way over in what they're wanting. Let's see, word and character limitations are the bane of any grant writing process. So just know that you might have to limit what you're saying based on words or character limitations, and it's very painful. And I hate it because it takes so much time to make sure you're down to those, but it's just part of the grant process. So get fresh eyes on your application. Critical. I just worked with a group a couple weeks ago who had a volunteer mother of one of their staff, which was very sweet, write some grants for them. And they asked me to come in and look at those grant proposals to help them understand why they didn't get funded. And this was her first time writing grants. They weren't terribly well written, and none of the staff had reviewed them before they actually submitted them. So I would not recommend that. Make sure that you get other eyes on those applications, whether it's internal on your farm or your organization, or external, maybe somebody who doesn't know your project very well and can have a little bit more of an objective perspective. Okay, I'm going to go through this one a little bit faster. So a couple more things. If you're doing letters of support, which is one of the common attachments for like a federal grant, You're going to want to offer some talking points or a draft for whoever you're asking to submit that for. It helps you be reassured that you're going to get it in a timely fashion, not have to answer a lot of questions about what should even be included. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that today because we don't have time, but that's one of the tips for like how to be strategic and a little more organized. So this is a really important one, understanding the grant review process. So a lot of funders will put in their guidelines how they're actually going to be reviewing your application. They might even tell you what points are going to be appointed, what points are going to be assigned to each section of your application. So you really want to look at that. What I have found is in those sections, sometimes they use different language, different kind of ways that they're talking about what they're looking for than they do in the guidelines, which I find interesting. So comparing or using both and the review section and the narrative description or guidelines is really helpful. All right, and I've hope I've honed this in. I don't know if I have enough. Know the grant deadline, including the time of day it's due, and submit well in advance, at least 2 days. So hopefully you don't need to know the time because you're submitting it multiple days in advance, but I've definitely been on the day of and assumed that it was at this time and it was actually at this time. So make sure you know the time of day and the time zone. Okay, this is too busy, but I'm just going to go over kind of the core pieces here. So I mentioned earlier the narrative portion of your application, which is really the heart of your application. Again, whether it's a more storytelling type of proposal or a more statistics or data-based, it's all still going to be in the narrative section. What I listed here are like the most common sections of your narrative, whether you're applying for a federal grant or a private foundation or a state grant. It's pretty, you can pretty much assume that you're going to need most of this or some variations of this. So you're going to need a project summary, which I recommend writing after you've written your whole other application, part of your application, to make sure you're summarizing exactly what you are writing. You'll need your story. You'll need your mission, your background, your history. You'll definitely need your goals and objectives and your timeline. Like those are going to be probably in any grant, no matter what, universally needed. And so you'll really need compelling goals. You'll really need to talk about how you're going to meet those goals and how you're going to, when you're going to do it, I should say, sorry. And then later on how you're going to evaluate those. So those are critical pieces. We obviously don't have time to go into each of these and talk about the best ways to write these, but there are a lot of tools online and a lot of resources online on how to kind of create good narratives for grants that are free. So, definitely utilize those resources as well. You'll also probably need to explain somewhere in your application, whether in the narrative or through like resumes, who is going to be working in this project. And then I mentioned the evaluation piece. Most funders want to know how you're going to communicate what you did, and then we'll talk about the budget and the budget narrative in a moment. But again, those are core pieces. Grants are tricky. Like I want to say they are all different, but there's kind of universal truths to them as well. Unfortunately, they're all different enough, but they want the same information, but in their own unique ways that sometimes it feels frustrating. Because you're like, if I could just submit the same application, or modify it, so I'm not double dipping, which we'll talk about in a moment, but it just would make our lives a lot easier and would help us save time, but that's not, unfortunately, the grant world. So you do need to cater each application that you're submitting to each funder a little differently, depending on what they want. Okay, this budget document is not terribly easy to read, but what it is demonstrating is a federal budget summary. And so federal grants, I believe universally, or at least under USDA, the ones that I've worked on, will have a very particular order that they want the different costs that you're applying for ordered. You'll actually be plugging this into grants.gov anyway. It's already kind of in that order. I recommend doing this offline again in an Excel spreadsheet and ordering it in the order that they have it. That way you're not trying to move this into the portal later and figure out where which piece goes. You already have it kind of all laid out. you'll see there that they have the federal column, the cash column, in-kind column. So again, without going too much into match, the federal is the portion that you're asking for, and then the rest is match what you're going to be providing to this project. So grant budgets are, I would say, universally the trickiest part of an application. It takes a lot of time, one, to get all the numbers together, especially if you're working with partners that have kind of budgets that they're proposing, or you have to do research to figure out what things cost, et cetera. And they can just be confusing to fill out the forms as well. So what I would say is definitely always use the templates that they give you if they do give you one, and follow those exactly. Again, attend those webinars, look at the guidelines, and do the best you can and get other eyeballs on it, especially if you have multiple people in your organization or farm. Make sure everybody has their eyes and this is looking right and aligning. The other part of a budget, so there's the actual budget, the hard numbers, and then there's the budget justification or the budget narrative. And so that's where you can see some of that. I know it's small to see, sorry, that some of that language in there where they're talking about, that first one is the staff manager is going to serve as the project coordinator for 300 hours at $25 an hour. So what they're doing is detailing out how they got to that that total number of 7,500. Some of that is matched, so that's a confusing example. But basically, they just want to know how you got to your numbers, and they want per unit costs. It's been rare to have too much narrative or too much justification. I would err on the side of more detail than less. Often there are some funders like SARE who fortunately are a little more flexible, and they might come back and say, your grant was approved, but your budget, we need to work on your budget narrative a little bit and get a little more detail. That's not common, so don't expect that. If your budget is off and not clear for most federal grants, you will get docked. So just make sure that this is as clear as possible. The last thing I'll say about the budget is what's so important about these different pieces of an application, the narrative and the budget being the two core pieces, is you really want to make sure that they're aligning. Like if you could lay them side by side and draw lines, making sure that each thing you're talking about doing in your narrative is justified, is represented in the budget as well. So you don't want to talk about, or you don't want something in the budget, for example, like buying, I don't know, traveling to maybe another farm for a farm tour or something, and then you don't talk about doing that at all in your application anywhere. Like reviewers won't understand why that's in your budget if you're not mentioning that you did it in your application. So you just want to make sure that everything is in alignment between your narrative and your budget. That would be true for any other kind of documents you have, and we'll talk here in a moment about other attachments. Let's see if there's anything else on the budget. Again, the budget's a hard one. I've done like a whole workshop just on budget, so it's a hard one to just skim over. But again, following their guidelines as to the T as possible is the best way to make sure you have a solid budget. Okay, so the last part of an application typically are attachments. So these are just some common ones. These aren't going to be all of them. And again, it's going to depend on if you're applying to federal grants, state or private foundations, what they'll want. Federally, common attachments are going to be those letters of support or commitment. And there will be details in the guidelines on what exactly they want in those letters. Like I mentioned earlier, they might want a list of who is going to be a part of this project. If you're a nonprofit, they might just want a list of your board members and your staff. Again, federal grants aren't going to want necessarily income statements, but a private foundation would typically want income and expense statements, organizational budgets, things like that. Other common application attachments are articles of incorporation or business certificates, a 501c3 letter if you're a nonprofit, sometimes a business plan, depending on the application you're applying to. That can be common in some USDA programs. So I mentioned photos, plans, or other supporting documentation, annual report. I want to be very clear that you should not attach anything that's not asked for. So even if you have really great photos or you have a really great pamphlet that you think reviewers are just going to love, or you want to include like a document that has a bunch of links with videos, Don't do it unless a funder explicitly says, please include additional attachments, and here's some examples of what we would take. So just don't do it. Last, for federal, there will be some additional forms that'll be required, but like I said, that'll all be detailed out in the guidelines. So a couple more things here. I know I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So I know a big question is how to find grants, and this is like the other kind of golden ticket question. So, um, you all are probably aware. If you're not, I will mention that, like, unfortunately, there's not a whole bucket load of grants out there for farmers, and farm programs. So federal is going to be the most common. We'll talk about a couple others that are out there as well. These are some different resources to find grant programs. This far left one, my left at least, the Building Sustainable Farms, Ranches, and Communities, is a fantastic book that you can get through Michael Field Ag Institute, and it highlights all the current Farm Bill programs. So, hopefully we have a new Farm Bill someday, but currently those are the ones that are again, we're also having a lot of wonky things going on with our federal grants, so I can't guarantee or say definitively that like everything in this book is available right now. We all know that there's a lot of question marks around federal grants, but that's a great resource, very accessible, talks about the common programs that are available to you, including conservation programs like through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. You can do a basic grants.gov search, and there's lots of different kind of entries you can put in, the keywords, et cetera, to find different grants. And then National Sustainable Ag Coalition also has a really great guide to federal programs. I also recommend for non-federal, honestly, I do Google, like, internet searches sometimes. This is just an example of like a quick search I did for Ohio, but are there county, city, or state grants? Those are going to be smaller, but especially state grants, there might be more opportunities. They might be more accessible than the federal ones for you. So make sure you check your Department of Ag websites. There might be private foundations. I have found very few that want to fund farms. Again, typically private foundations want to support nonprofits. I'm not recommending you transition to a nonprofit necessarily, but just wanted to mention that it might be harder to find private foundations for farm initiatives. I mentioned doing basic internet searches, ask aligned groups where they get funding. If it doesn't feel uncomfortable to ask them, sometimes I look at people's websites and see like who they've acknowledged as their funders. And then you can sign up for free philanthropy newsletters like this one. Again, those are probably going to be more catered to nonprofits, but you can set up different alerts. A couple really common federal grants. We've mentioned SARE a few times. SARE is like pseudo-federal. These are some of the most very common USDA grants that we're seeing folks apply for. There are several others as well. And then, like I mentioned, looking at your state ag department's websites for what grants are available for farmers. Like I said, that might be your biggest bang for the buck there. And then Madison shared a few, and I had a few as well. I know there's a lot on here, just as some examples of some smaller funders out there that are looking to fund farm programs. The Fruit Guys Community Grant provides grants to farmers or nonprofits. American Farmland Trust has multiple opportunities. Madison shared this Maryland Producer Cold Storage Grant. Some from Chesapeake Bay, and then the Southern Maryland Farmer Mini Grant Program. So I know there's a lot of info here, and I'm sure Madison's available to share more of these. And like I said, I'll share these links as well. But so I don't want to say there's only state or only federal. There are some others, but they're going to typically be a smaller pool, maybe 5,000 to 10,000. And every time I say that, farmers are like, "That's so much money to us." I'm like, "Yeah, but like, I'd love for you to have 20,000 or 100,000." So smaller in my mind, but I know still a big pot for you all. I wanted to just use this last one as an example. So the Southern Maryland Farmer Mini Grant Program. So I put a description in there that says the mini grant program is designed to assist new and beginning farmers. And so I think like on reading that initially, you could say, great, that's for me. Perfect, I'm gonna look into this more. But if we look at their website, which is where I pulled that description from, you'll see here that it's applicable to certain counties, and so it's only available to certain folks. So that's just an example of one of the things you want to always be sure you're looking at all the detail. A grant can sound really great, and then you get in and you start digging in. You're like, oh, it's only available to folks in certain regions or certain entities, like I mentioned earlier. So great if you're in those counties or in those areas, but you wouldn't be eligible if you were outside of those. So just make sure you're looking at details like that. I think that was, nope. Okay. Second to last slide. Yes. Okay. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Last one, I mentioned a few of these earlier. So some of the common issues in applications, reasons why grants aren't funded. A grant deadline is missed. That can happen to the best of us. So just make sure, like I said, that you know when the grant deadline is. You're trying to apply at least a couple days early. That way, if you press that big red submit button and there's an error or something's wrong, you have time to fix it. It's the worst to be within minutes of the deadline. So don't set yourself up for that scenario. Guidelines weren't followed or application was incomplete. So again, that how-to manual, that guideline is going to be the best way to ensure that this isn't happening. Your application was vague, not clear, or poorly written. I mentioned that example earlier of the mother volunteer who was very sweet to write those applications, but they weren't terribly well written and nobody reviewed them before they submitted. So, reviewing grant writing 101 tips. We went over a few today. There's tons out there on the internet that you can follow as well. If you don't feel like a particularly strong writer, I don't want to discourage you from submitting grant applications. You just might need a little bit more support. I know folks are using AI now. I don't use it, but I know that that's been really helpful for a lot of groups as well. So I can't say either way. Last couple bullets.
Wren, I think we lost your audio there. Can you hear us?
Waste time or go through all the time of applying to a grant that you know that you are eligible and ready. And then the budget isn't reasonable or the costs that you're asking for aren't eligible. If you're asking for a tractor and they don't fund a tractor, you're not, it's not going to be a winning application. Okay. I know that only leaves us 10 minutes for questions, but I'm going to stop now and see what questions there are.
Hi, this is Lester Jones here. I have a question. Well, two questions. I could make it super quick. First question is, are you familiar with the USDA EQIP grant?
I'm familiar with Equip. Yeah.
So,
It's not a grant, but yeah, go ahead.
okay, so sorry about that. So,
That's okay.
quick question about that. If you're applying for said grant, can you bundle multiple projects in one, or is it like one at a time?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So let's see how I can answer that quickly and succinctly. It's going to depend. That's going to be probably my answer to every question. It's going to depend on the funder and the particular grant program. So some grants are wanting a very specific project, and like I said, they're probably going to want something innovative, and so that is a project or program specific grant. There are some grants out there that are called general operating, which is you as an entity need $10,000 to help with programs, projects, admin, everything. You need that support, and you apply for 10,000 and you get 10,000, and then you get to apply it anywhere you want in your organization. Unfortunately, those types of grants are much more rare, which is very unfortunate because those are the best types of grants out there. You know best how to spend your money. But so I don't know if that's quite answering your question, but you just need to look and see if it's very much like if it's a project that's trying to enhance market access or something. You could have maybe many programs that relate to that, and that's fine, but you need to really make sure you're following the guidelines and what the funder wants. And it all has to be related to, marketing if that grant is for marketing. That wasn't a great explanation. So as far as EQIP goes, EQIP is a cost share program, not a grant. So you would work with your local natural resources or NRCS office to apply for those. So it's a whole different process to apply.
Hello?
I think the internet is a little unstable. Let's see if Wren
She
comes back.
froze.
Okay, she might have to hop back in. Yeah, all right, Wren, are you back now?
Weird. Sorry about that.
Okay, I think we can hear you. Could you just say something?
Yeah.
Okay, you're good. Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, so there's one question in the chat from Quandra, just wondering if farming typically, like the term farm typically includes vertical farming or any types of smart agriculture like aquaculture or anything like that. And then I just asked others if they have questions they want to share, just to raise their hand with the little Zoom feature, so we can keep track of everyone there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, you'll want to look at who the eligible entities are. Some funders like SARE, I have heard, have been a little bit more cautious or are still kind of figuring out how like aquaculture or aquaponics fits into their funding model, because they focus so much on sustainability. What I've heard is they haven't quite the case has to be made pretty strongly. And so there have been aquaculture projects funded. What I would recommend for SARE, for example, is you can go into the SARE website and see what projects have been funded in the past. And you can even type in like aquaculture or aquaponics, and you can see what kind of projects have been funded. So I don't have like a definitive answer for you. It's really going to depend on the definitions, for USDA, their definitions of farming, agriculture, and what kind of projects they want to fund. So not definitively, no, but I have noticed some funders are still kind of figuring out how it fits into their programs.
Awesome, thank you. And it looks like John McGuire has his hand up as well.
Yeah, my project's a little bit different, and I am very much in the design and development phase, idea phase. I'm basically starting a retirement company. I've been a builder all my life, but I'd like to start a design and development company that specializes in agri-hood development, residential agri-hood development, and permaculture homesteading type of design, and incorporating that with the construction of a smart home, that fits with all those practices, greenhouses and all that type of stuff. Where would I find a clearinghouse for different types of grants and programs and I know that's more in the design development phase, but are you aware of any type of grants or foundations that are looking to try to reinvent the American family farm or how it's done? And, I mean, this is what I'm trying to. Is there a clearinghouse, a list of grants and funders and programs that they're looking to fund?
Oh,
What resource? Where do I go to look that up other than Google?
Yeah, sure. I understand. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of groups who have tried to like create, grant lists for farms and ag projects and other related groups. But I think it's a lot of them are going to kind of overlap with what we've shared or what Madison might even have in her list. So I don't have a great answer for you on that. I don't think there's a clearinghouse one spot. I shared with you federal wise, like federal government grants. You can go to grants.gov and search. I think I didn't unfortunately quite get everything you're wanting to do in your proposal, so I apologize, and I'm happy to be followed up with. We can follow up afterwards, and I'd be glad to hear a little bit more about what you want to do. I think that, you know, again, whether you're a nonprofit or a business model, a lot of funders want to see some funding already invested in your and some funds generated already. And so that might mean finding investors. It might mean doing some crowdsourcing or kind of the campaigns to kind of get more funding first to make you just to legitimize your work a little bit more, which I hate to say it that way, but unfortunately that's one thing that funders look at. Not saying your project isn't legitimate or a good idea by any means. So
You mean above and beyond self-funding?
It depends on how your kind of numbers are looking with your like budget reports and things like that. So self-funded would be part of that for sure, but especially and again, private foundations, which I don't think is what you're looking at, they like to see, you know, that you have funding from other sources typically as well. So I'm going to put my email in the chat quick. And John, if you want to email me and again, tell me a little bit more about your project idea and program, and please do, and then happy to see if I can think of more ideas for you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ren. And Terry has his hand up as well. So we'll address that question and then we should be wrapping up. So any last minute questions, share them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as quickly as possible.
Hey, hi guys. So great call. Make sure I have the link so I can see the beginning because I had a meeting before this. But so I've been in information technology for 30 years, old guy with gray hair. And much of that time either developing, you know, architecting or in the executive roles. I've only spent 12 years as a backyard farmer. I can grow stuff and eat it. The omelets in the morning are better than before. My interest is around farm to table, and any vectors or information about grants that that support innovations around farm to table development, aggregating resources, distributing, those resources into communities, to provide a better way, to live and be healthy. Can you give me just some advice or guidance there?
Yeah. Again, without kind of knowing more about it, there are a couple programs that are open. They're closing in a week, so I wouldn't recommend right now applying, but I'm not.
Ren, I think we lost you.
Man, I was really excited about her answer too.
Hopefully she'll unfreeze soon and we'll get the full answer.
The ultimate cliffhanger.
It looks like she had to hop out and she'll hop back in to finish that answer. But I'll take a minute here just as a reminder to everyone to please complete the worksheet. I shared the link in the chat. We'll be sending a follow-up email as well. And again, we're here to help. So if anyone has additional questions, please reach out. We want to hear from you.
Wren is back.
Awesome. Wren, can you hear us?
I never have internet issues, and now it's booting me. I'm so sorry, folks. Of course. I was gonna put in a program link in the chat. I was saying this is a federal program. I don't know if this one would fit without knowing more about your project idea, but I will go ahead and put The AMS, I'm just going to put the whole AMS link in the chat. I also saw quickly that somebody else asked, I don't know if they're still on, if I said that typically tractors aren't an eligible project request, and that's accurate. That's very rare to find a grant that'll fund that type of equipment. Some of those smaller funders I talked about at the end, like the Fruit Guys or American Farmland Trust, those tend to be more general operating where you can apply those funds to kind of wherever you want. And so those might potentially be fits, but again, you need to make sure you are eligible and qualify for those grants. So please email me if you have more questions about your specific project ideas. I do not mind kind of looking at those and seeing if I have any other ideas for you.
And Wren, was it just the link or were there other comments? Because you went out like as soon as you started talking.
Okay. I was kind of just rambling saying this might be a fit, but I'm not sure without knowing more about your project. So farmers market and local food promotion programs are two that are open right now. They close in a week, so I wouldn't recommend this year trying to apply, but those potentially could be options without knowing more. So.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
All right, well, I think we're in pretty good shape to start wrapping up. So I'd like to thank Wren for being here, sharing all this information with us. It was extremely helpful. And thank you to all the participants for attending as well. We'll be sure to get the recording to you if anyone wants to view the recording. Yes, I see Chelsea in the chat. Another reminder just to complete the worksheet. It's meant to benefit you and to help us understand how we can help you better. Please reach out to any of us, and we would love to have Wren back for another webinar in the future to continue answering questions. Like, grants are just a very hot topic right now, so any expert guidance we can get would be wonderful. And Wren, if you wouldn't mind sending the slides, then I can distribute that to everyone in attendance as well.
Can do. Thank you.
Awesome. So any last minute notes from anyone that you'd like to add?
Yes, I have a question. So, hi, Wren, I'm Kwandra. Wren, I see that you have your own consulting and you do grant writing. That's why you're talking about it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, how typically do you get paid? So, what I was told by people who use grant writers, those who get paid on the back end when the grant is won, and those who get paid up front. How are you set up?
Yeah, most grant writers should only be accepting funding up front. It's considered kind of unethical to do it only if you get funded. I'm not sure if that's what they were talking about or not. Maybe they were talking about a different model I'm not aware of. So we think about it as, any other service where there's some risk involved. Certainly, you don't know if you're going to get the grant, and we could write the best grant proposal and you don't know. But so I'll just say in short, for me, I would set up a contract from the start. There might be other ways we could look at it. Some of my clients I have kind of a longer relationship with, and we have a different model. But yeah, it's not recommended to do it the other way, just because then that grant writer might be totally out of money and they put in so much work. So I would be bummed for them if that happened. But that's a great question. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Wren. We're happy to have you here. Appreciate your time. And I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone.
Thanks.
And thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.